You know that moment when you check your bank account and instead of that familiar knot in your stomach, you feel nothing. No panic, no quick math in your head about what's due this week. Just a number that sits there quietly, doing its job. That moment doesn't happen at 0. It doesn't even happen at 10,000 or 20,000. There's a specific point where your brain finally stops treating your bank balance like a threat. Most people assume that feeling doesn't show up until you're sitting on 6 figures or some untouchable rich person number. But here's what they're missing. That shift happens way earlier than you think, and it happens at a number most financial content completely ignores. That number is $30,000. My name is Kevin, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why some people build real momentum with their finances, while others feel like they're doing everything right and still going nowhere. If you've ever wondered what actually changes once your savings stop feeling fragile, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you see your own progress differently. Now, before we get into why $30,000 is such a big deal, let me ask you something. When you picture someone who's made it financially, what number pops into your head? 100,000? $500,000? $1 million sitting in some account you'll probably never see? Here's the thing. Those numbers matter eventually, sure, but they're not where the real transformation happens. The real transformation happens quietly, way before you'd expect it, at a number that feels almost too small to matter. Think about a snowball rolling down a hill. At the very top, it's tiny. You're the one doing all the work, packing it, pushing it, watching it barely grow no matter how hard you try. But there's a point partway down where the snowball stops needing your help. It's picking up snow on its own now. It's moving because of its own weight, its own momentum, not because you're still pushing it. $30,000 is roughly that point. It's not the bottom of the hill. You're nowhere near done. But it's the spot where the thing you built stops being fragile and starts being self-sustaining. Here's where it gets interesting. And this is the part almost nobody talks about. Up until this point, your savings have mostly been a story about your behavior. How much did you not spend this month? How disciplined were you at the grocery store? How many times did you say no to something you wanted? That's exhausting. And it's supposed to be, because you're the entire engine. But somewhere around $30,000, something changes. Your money starts pulling its own weight in a way that's finally big enough to notice without squinting. At a conservative 7% annual return, $30,000 generates about $2,100 a year without you lifting a finger. That's not life-changing money, but it's real money. It's more than a lot of people's monthly grocery bill. It's happening in the background, while you're at work, while you're asleep, while you're doing literally anything else. And this is where the psychological shift kicks in. Once you've watched your investments generate an amount that actually matters to you, your brain stops treating saving as pure sacrifice. Behavioral researchers who study money habits have found that people consistently underestimate how motivating it is to see even modest passive gains show up in real numbers. It's the difference between believing compound growth works in theory and actually watching it happen in your own account. Let's talk about the math, because this is where most people's brains completely check out, and that's exactly the mistake you don't want to make. Say you're saving and investing $500 a month, earning that same 7% return. Getting to your first $10,000 takes a while. It's slow. It's mostly just you, showing up every single month, watching a number creep painfully gradually. But by the time you're closing in on $30,000, the math has quietly flipped on you in the best way possible. Your next $10,000 doesn't take nearly as long as your first, because now you've got real money working alongside your monthly contribution, instead of you working alone. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. Once you cross $30,000, your investments alone are generating more in a single year than most people manage to save from scratch in 4 or 5 months. You didn't get a raise, you didn't start a side hustle, you didn't change anything about your income. The money that's already there is simply doing more of the heavy lifting than it used to, and it keeps doing more every single year you leave it alone. But the real story at $30,000 isn't just mathematical. It's what happens in your head. Somewhere in the 10 to 20,000 range, most people are still operating in what feels like defense mode. You're building a cushion, you're protecting yourself from disaster. That's important, but it's a fundamentally reactive mindset. By the time you hit 30, something shifts. You stop asking, what if something goes wrong, and start asking, what could I actually do with this? That's not a small difference. That's the line between a saver and an investor, and crossing it changes how you evaluate literally every decision in your life. Think about what this actually means day to day. Your car needs a $1,200 repair. At $10,000, that stings. At $30,000, it's an inconvenience you barely think about twice. A friend mentions a solid investment opportunity that needs a few $1,000s to get in. Before, that conversation would have ended with you nodding politely and changing the subject. Now, you can actually run the numbers and decide if it's worth it. Your job starts making unreasonable demands. Before, you'd swallow it because you needed the paycheck. Now, you have enough of a buffer to push back, or even start quietly looking elsewhere, because you're not one emergency away from disaster anymore. This is what people mean when they talk about walking away money. Except at $30,000, it's not just theoretical. It's substantial enough to actually change your posture in every negotiation you're a part of. Whether that's with your boss, a landlord, or a car dealer trying to talk you into a payment you don't need. And here's the strange part. Most people never actually use this money to walk away from anything. Just knowing they could is enough to change how they show up. Confidence isn't something you fake. It's something that shows up naturally once you've got real financial ground underneath you. And other people notice it, whether they realize why or not. Now, here's where most people mess this up. And I want to be direct about it because I've watched this happen constantly. They hit $30,000, feel that shift, and immediately treat it like permission to loosen up. They upgrade the car, they book the expensive trip they've been putting off. They figure they've proven they can save, so a little reward is deserved. And look, you can absolutely enjoy your progress, but $30,000 isn't the finish line. It's the point where your snowball just started rolling on its own. Slow it down now, and you're not just losing that money. You're losing years of momentum that money would have built for you automatically. Here's a comparison that tends to land hard. The average cost of financing a new vehicle over its loan term can easily eat up more money than it takes most people to reach this exact milestone in the first place. Meanwhile, that same amount left invested instead of spent would have kept compounding, kept growing, kept working every single day, whether you thought about it or not. The car depreciates the second you drive it off the lot. The investment does the opposite. It's the same amount of money pointed in two completely different directions, and only one of those directions is still working for you 10 years from now. There's also a mental shift that happens around this milestone that almost nobody mentions. You start caring less about tiny purchases and more about the big ones. When you're just starting out, every dollar feels enormous, so you obsess over the small stuff. Generic versus name brand, coffee at home versus coffee out. But once you've got $30,000 working in the background, you realize those micro decisions were never the real lever. The real lever is your housing costs, your income, and where your money goes long term. That shift in focus frees up an enormous amount of mental energy because you stop fighting tiny battles that were never going to move the needle anyway. Let's talk about what happens to your career once you're past this point, because this is genuinely one of the most underrated effects of building real savings. When you're financially fragile, you're stuck playing it safe. You take the job that's available instead of the one you actually want. You avoid asking for what you're worth because you can't afford the risk of pushback. But once you've got $30,000 sitting behind you, you're negotiating from an entirely different position. Worst case, you're fine either way. That mindset alone tends to lead to better outcomes, not because the money directly gets you a raise, but because the confidence it gives you changes how you show up, how you ask, and what you're willing to risk to get it. There's a version of this that plays out quietly for years. The person with 30,000 invested and growing keeps making the same steady, unremarkable decisions. Keep contributing. Keep the money invested. Don't panic sell when the market dips. Don't rate it for something that feels urgent but isn't. Nothing about that looks exciting from the outside. But give it a decade, and the gap between that person and someone who spent every extra dollar along the way becomes almost impossible to close. Not because one person was smarter, because one person let their snowball keep rolling, and the other one kept stopping to rebuild it from scratch every few years. So if you're sitting somewhere below 30,000 right now, staring at a number that feels painfully small, understand what you're actually building. You're not just saving money. You're getting your snowball moving down the hill. The first stretch is the hardest part, the part where it feels like nothing is happening no matter how much you push it all. But it's already working, even when you can't see it yet. Keep it rolling long enough, and you'll hit the point where it stops needing you to push at all. That's not $1 million away. For most people doing this consistently, it's closer than they think. And once you feel that shift, once you check your account and feel calm instead of anxious, you'll understand exactly why this number matters so much more than people give it credit for.